Hi, and thank you so much for popping by. My name is Dr. Rita Pobalozi, and you're most welcome to this conversation today. On my mind are the Kgosi, or the chiefs and chieftainship in Botswana. The reason I'm talking about them is because I noticed that in this week's latest news coverage and coverage about the role of the Kgosi in a modern democracy, and I thought, wow, what can I find out about this whole topic of the role and function of the Kgosi in modern democracy? Now, chiefs are a big thing, I think, in the African region, but I'm going to speak specifically to the Botswana context. Research is showing that, when it comes to Botswana as a community, Botswana absolutely want to have their chiefs. They want to belong and to be recognized within this context of tribes, right? So every tribe wants to have their chief. Every tribe wants to be led by that chief. So there's definitely a need from the community perspective, reason why the chiefs are still holding that influence to this day. And of course, research also shows that, the chiefs have been there before colonization, they were there during colonization, and they're still here post-colonization. So these are characters or players that have been influential from way back. What I think is very interesting actually about Dikgosi and chieftainship is that they've managed to modernize. I say modernize because they are still here in modern society. And even though they might not be modern in roots, because they hold very traditional roots and cultural roots, but they have managed to modernize themselves in sense of they are relevant. They have maintained that relevance. They have managed to overcome this drive for democracy and liberalism and still to maintain that traditional and cultural strength. And what I've noticed about Kgosi as a public health person or somebody who's been reporting a lot on health journalism is that, the chiefs are always at the forefront of public health initiatives, right? Whenever there is a message, a public health orientated message, you will find that the chiefs are being called in to say, we need to help you deliver this message to the people in a language that the people understand, in the context that the people understand. And, once you have a chief buying into a health message, you can be assured that their community will also follow through in terms of subscribing to that health message. So we've seen this in HIV context, we've seen this in the gender-based violence context, and we've seen this in multiple other scenarios where the chiefs are addressed and reached out to from a public health perspective in order to make that message more relatable to the people. But at the same time, I do have my own little problems with Kgosi, because this is why I feel they haven't been good with dealing with gender-based violence. They themselves subscribe to patriarchy. Do you understand what I'm saying? Their mindset. In the coverage that I was seeing about Silika village, the woman was born into the family of the chief. It is her birthright to be a chief. But for some reason, patriarchy has had an upper hand in this whole process where she now has to defend her birthright in government courts to say, I am the one who is rightfully placed to be the chief of this village because I was born into the chief's family and I'm the daughter of the former chief who passed away, right? And this is also similar to what Kgosi Mosadi Seboko had to do. She had to fight for her birthright. Kgosi Mosadi Seboko was also the firstborn daughter of the chief, but she had to fight. She had to fight to be. We talk a lot about Dikgosi when we talk about marriages in Botswana, right? We talk a lot about Dikgosi when we talk about issues of inheritance in Botswana. We talk about Dikgosi when we talk about things like disputes and community disputes, right? And that's why I say somewhere, somehow, because they're so patriarchal in mindset, it can mean that it becomes difficult for them to address or help to address something such as gender-based violence. Something else that I've noticed is that, the Kgosi, they absolutely understand their influence. And I have seen how they can also fall into the politics of the day. And I will give an example with Kgosi Kgosi Khama, who is also the former president of Botswana, Lieutenant General Ian Khama, right? So this is a man who has had influence not only as a Kgosi Kgolo, but he's also had influence as a politician. And I see him as somebody who has that very dual presence, so that's why his presence is so influential. He's not just your typical politician. He also happens to be Kgosi Kgolo ya Bangwato, one of the biggest tribes in Botswana, and therefore I can see why there's always some form of attention that politicians want from him. He's always been a person of interest to politicians, regardless of which party it is. They have a keen interest in making sure that they are in good books with Kgosi Kgolo Ian Khama. And another interesting story in the same week about chieftainship and its role in modern democracy is where the Mangwato are finally said to be honoring Kgosi Khamani, because at some point there was so much political interference in the chieftainship that it became hard for them to celebrate him when he retired, right? And so, yeah, you can see that there's so many tensions between the Kgosi government and the community. And there's a lot of tension also between the Kgosi of different tribes. So the Kgosi from the Tswana tribes seem to have a lot of tension with the Kgosi from the non-Tswana tribes, right? So you have the Bayei, you have the Basobia, you have the Bakalanga, etc., those who are non-Tswana speaking tribes. You find that there is a lot of tension there. Even within the structure, there's an issue of hierarchy, right? So you can tell that there are those tribes who believe they're more important or more influential or more prominent or dominant than other tribes, and therefore want to rule the smaller tribes. And in this case, the non-Tswana tribes are saying, no. The non-Tswana speaking tribes are saying, no. We want to have our own sense of independence. We don't want to be ruled by a chief from another tribe. So yeah, like I said, I absolutely appreciate the Kgosi and their function, particularly from a public health perspective. And I can absolutely see why they have been able to maintain, adapt, and be relevant in modern democracy, because they have been listening to the They've been listening to royal advice, right? So they have been listening to advice outside of the traditional royal advice. So in that way, they've been very open-minded and adaptable to the current community, the current system, right, of governance. Alrighty, my friend, I thank you so much for popping by. I hope you are having a lovely day where you are, but most importantly, I hope you are having a healthy day wherever you're watching me from. Bye.